Current time is now 7:23 p.m. here in Seoul, South Korea. It's time for Made in Korea with Professor John Demoya from Seoul National University, who joins us in the studio. Professor Demoya, hello to you.
Thanks very much for having me.
I enjoy, if you could come a little bit closer to the microphone,
Sure.
this way, a little bit this way, this way. There you go, there you
Okay.
go. It's always difficult with these camera angles. Professor Demoya and I, we have like 30 seconds of discussion, chat, before every time the segment begins. And it's always fun, and I want to continue it, but begins the segment. And syllabus. I was asking him when the school started again. And then he said syllabus time. He's making a syllabus. And I said, oh my, I started getting traumatic experiences of losing my syllabus. Apparently now they're all digital now.
Yeah, most universities at some point with the internet age adopted online systems. Students submit their work online. We return it to them online. I imagine it's not just in Korea. It's most universities now have some kind of online coursework.
Man, you know what I used to do when I was a college student is I have a hard time focusing on those like hour, 30-minute long classes.
Sorry, how did you say? An hour, 30 minutes?
Hour, 30 minutes.
Seoul Day lectures are 3 hours in theory.
Well,
2:45.
Theory classes are like 3 hours long. Yeah,
I'm just saying, I've gotten
those.
used to 2 and 2.5 is normal for me.
I used to just...
But I agree with you. When I was an undergrad, yes.
I just take my digital camera that I had back then, and I would just record it. Unfortunately,
Sure.
Unfortunately, however, back in those days, the largest size was like 128 megabytes, and there was not a lot of recording that we could have done. But now, apparently, people could do this.
Yeah.
Oh, what a time that people live in these days. Professor Demoya, our little chit-chat and our little laughs here and there is much needed, because what we're going to be talking about next is very tragic.
Yeah, and as seems to be a theme of the last several weeks, if not months, very much still in the air, very much still unknown. So we will, to give the listeners a heads up, not necessarily achieve any resolution here.
Yeah, and so there are speculations.
Right.
And there's no clear-cut answer as to what exactly led to this tragedy, but 해방, or liberation, right? We had Liberation Day not too long ago, exactly 2 weeks ago. Exactly 2 weeks ago.
Exactly 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago we had Liberation Day. Moment of great rejoice.
Yeah.
Celebrations.
35 years of colonization is over.
However, what's often left out, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't know about this.
Sure.
And our producer gave me the homework to look into it. And it was so tragic. There was a tragic incident that happened leading up to this. But we're going to be talking about how this reality was handled and what exactly happened after the 해방. And first sort of question to you is, where were the different populations of Koreans on August 15, 1945?
This is a great question, because we tend to forget that it's not divided yet into North and South, and that there were plenty of Koreans who were outside the peninsula because, of course, they were mobilized in the Imperial War effort.
Yes.
So lots of places, but to keep it to the basics, obviously a lot in Japan, working in the various industries, a lot in Manchuria, which is still in many ways the core of the Japanese industrial heartland, even though obviously we now think of it as China. Mm-hmm. And then obviously, again, a lot distributed all throughout Southeast Asia. The point being then that when 해방 is declared, the incoming military authorities, which in this case is GHQ, General Headquarters for Japan, and 미군중, or USAMGIK for what will be the Korean Peninsula, they have to figure out what do we do with all these people? Who goes where? This is, if we even think just to COVID a couple years ago, a huge public health thing, because they know what happened after World War I with the Spanish flu. So they're thinking disease, sanitation, migration, and then most importantly too, which we won't talk about, but it's relevant to mention it, they're thinking in terms of possessions. They don't want people suddenly just grabbing stuff like Japanese soldiers, taking stuff and leaving Korea bereft. So they're very careful about trying to crack down on black market activities, which actually do happen. But
yeah, of course. Yeah. Korea's a very different time right now. And again, I mean, there's a lot of confusion too once the liberation happens, right? Like what happens moving forward? Because we've been under control by the Japanese government for such a long time, for 35 years. Yeah. And now that we have this freedom, what goes on here? And What about the many forced laborers who are in Japan?
Precisely.
Most of them. And this is where everything sort of kind of starts off here. But how would their movements be handled or addressed, though?
Yeah, sure. And this is what's interesting, and this is still a topic of great interest to many historians. I'm not sure whether it's GHQ or USAMJK or in combination, but they announced at some point fairly early on in the fall of 45 that there's going to be a repatriation scheme and that people are to return to their quote-unquote home country. Now, this means that there are people, and particularly let's stick with Koreans, who will quite willingly say, great, I can finally go home, there's liberation, see what's going on. But this doesn't account for example, Koreans who have been in Japan for several generations working there. And as you can anticipate, this will in some cases later become Zainichi populations, Kyopo. It doesn't account for Koreans who might be in other places in Asia who, for whatever reason, don't necessarily want to go where they're supposed to go.
They might have started a family.
Yeah. And then also defining home in many of these cases is not completely clear. As you just said, when the members of a particular family might come from several different nation states. And then, of course, as you can guess, with North and South Korea coming on the scene soon, that complicates the home question even further.
Yeah. Again, I mean, it's not only Japan. Where the Koreans were forced into labor.
Precisely.
Again, many parts of the Asia-Pacific region there. And so kind of organizing it. And we're talking about in the 40s right now, right? We're not talking about 2024.
Right, we're thinking here primarily 45 and 46.
Yeah, exactly. And so they're all supposed to be coming on ships. It's not like, hey, we have this, cargo ship that everybody could be in.
And just to complicate it, which is,
Sure.
nicely, remember that we're talking about, and this is how the Kuomintang Nationalist Party ends up in Taiwan, because this also affects not just Korea, but Taiwan, other parts of the empire.
Yes.
And by the way, there's a Chinese civil war going on, or starting up again. So that makes that situation even more complicated.
Yeah.
This is not an easy situation at all.
No, it really isn't. But so what was the overall repatriation process for Korea like?
Yeah,
though?
sure.
Like, what did it require? I mean, obviously needed, despite the fact that, hey, we hate Japan and you guys were defeated in the war.
Two basic things to keep it simple. One, in theory, when the Russians and the U.S. create the temporary border at the 38th, which of course we know turns out not to be temporary, that border is supposed to be open and porous so that people who want to move in either direction can, and there is some movement north and south.
Yeah.
And also, most importantly, so that all the Japanese soldiers who are all over Asia can either through train or through their own bodily means make their way all the way through the peninsula down to Busan and get repatriated back to Japan, because they're also, as Koreans are coming back, Japanese are supposed to leave the Korean peninsula.
That's right.
Yeah.
So it's kind of a safe repatriation deal in place? Like, are you going, hey, we're going to guarantee that many of the Japanese people who are living in Korea will be allowed to go back to Japan safely.
Yeah, and the second thing I forgot to mention really quickly is, and then they channel this through 4 major ports.
Okay.
And those ports handle both incoming Korean and outgoing Japanese, and that's exactly to do things like property check, spray them with DDT for disease, and
Wow.
So many Koreans and people have written about this. Their first experience of coming home is being sprayed with DDT. There are pictures of this, and most importantly, because they didn't have enough personnel to handle all the massive amount of traffic that was coming through, sometimes they asked Japanese to remain behind for a few months because they obviously had been operating the government. And so you get sprayed with DDT by a Japanese guy, and you're like, what is going on here? Yeah. I just got home.
Mind you, the book Silent Spring was not out yet.
No, right. That's 62, yeah. DDT was widely perceived as a... No, there are hundreds of pictures of this. This topic is a major public health controversy.
Let's talk about what is at the center of today's lesson. What was the Ukishima Maru?
Sure. This was a Japanese ship that was built in 1937. For a long time was used as kind of a transport ship in, I believe, the Kansai area. But most importantly for our purposes, when you get to the end of the war, it is running primarily in the north between Hokkaido and Honshu, the northern island and the main islands. And when this repatriation process comes up, it is rapidly commissioned into, oh, by the way, you're one of the ships that's going to be helping Koreans get back to Korea. And this is where the interesting controversy will happen, because this is all in the rapid, chaotic few weeks right after August 15th. In fact, the actual thing that we're going to talk about, the disaster, is August 24th.
August 24th, so 9 days after liberation was declared. I mean, it's not...
you can imagine how chaotic it must have been.
Yeah, I mean, it's not as easy as, hey, we are liberated, and on that day, everyone is going to be going home and stuff like that. We're not living in a Boeing 787 and all that, 777 era right now. Everything is done on ship. It moves, a lot, slower. Communications a lot slower here. But the Ukishima Maru, or the Ukishima Ho, as we say in Korea, is at the center of this tragedy and controversy and mystery. Where was the ship headed as of late August 1945?
Yes.
We said 9 days after, it was 24th, you said.
Yes, August 24th. Yeah, it was specifically moving towards Busan. We will talk in a moment about the numbers, but basically it was carrying a few Japanese personnel and a significant number of Koreans.
So from the Hokkaido, northern Japan area?
No, it was coming from the central or western Japan, the Kyoto area, basically.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But it just makes sense. The part of Japan across from Korea and then going to Busan to drop people off.
Okay, so I mean, you're talking about a major route there, right? I mean, because Busan being the major port, one of the major ports at the time, a lot of people are going in and out through that town. But what happened to the ship?
Sure. Very controversially. First thing, the Allies send, MacArthur apparently sends out an order saying that, it's only 10 days after the end of the war. For whatever reasons, briefly, ships should be back in port. So the Ukishima Maru pulls into Maizuru, which is a city in the Kyoto area, and that port. What happens there while they are there is that the ship explodes, some sort of explosion takes place and goes down. And that's where we will have a controversy over the mechanism that caused the explosion, the number of Koreans who were on board, because both sides acknowledged that there were Koreans, but the numbers vary between several hundred up to 6,000. And of course, this becomes an ongoing issue that, as we'll talk about, still compensation issues, apology issues, the remains of some of the family members. All of these things will still play out from mostly in the early, late 40s, but still even today.
So it wasn't even as if the ship was on the move.
No, it was not out at sea.
Right. I mean, because
it was in the harbor at the time.
Which makes it more easily believable that there was some tampering going on, right? I mean, we're not talking about, in 1945, now someone is not going to be planting a bomb and then detonating it from
I could give you the two narratives that kind of are around it exactly.
Give us the two narratives.
Sure. The one, of course, is the Japanese explanation, which, as you just said, makes sense because they're pulling into an area which had been heavily mined by the Americans. In fact, will not be cleared until 1952. The Japanese claim is that the ship hit an American mine pulling into the port, and in the process of that exploded. What you get from Korean survivors are a number of accounts saying that they had seen Japanese personnel on the ship behaving in a suspicious manner. There are claims that perhaps the ship was carrying explosives itself, and then in the process of pulling into port was maybe dumping them not to be seen when they pull into port. For whatever reason, you get a very different account from the Korean survivors than you get from the official Japanese government explanation.
Man, see, the thing is, though...
Exactly.
The thing is, though... It's not like one side is more outrageous than the other.
No, they both actually make sense in their own
Oh,
ways.
they definitely do, right? So you can argue, and again, there is no answer to this. We still don't, till this day, we don't know what exactly happened.
Precisely.
Let's examine...
Other than that, the ship did go down.
Right, exactly, and there were many Koreans, although we're not sure how many Koreans per se, which must have been that the explosion was that big.
Yes, and there's another explanation for it as well, which I buy, which is given that with the ship rapidly being pulled into August 15th, August 24th, and by the way, you're going to be picking up thousands of Koreans and taking them back, that those numbers might not have gone into the logs as opposed to the people who are already on the record as having long been associated with the ship. In other words, in 10 days and you're getting people on board, you might not be providing an exhaustive list of everyone who's on board.
Yeah, and again,
that accounts for some of the variation in the numbers.
Record keeping was very dodgy at the time. So let's first examine what the Japanese are saying, because this too is credible, right? I did hear many, and I'm not being a conspiracy theorist or anything like that. These are things that people are also mentioning because they're saying the mines.
It's the end of the war. The U.S. has heavily mined these waters, and in the process of getting back to the port, it's only 10 days after the end of the war. There are lots of active mines still in the water.
Yeah, and because the U.S. being a huge ally of South Korea helped them a great deal. Actually not yet, right? During the Korean War, but still there is still some exchanges diplomatically, and not as like amount that we're seeing right now,
Sure.
that it was the United States who were trying to shush everything. And not take the blame for what had happened, but it is true, like you said, there were mines that were in that area.
Absolutely. And again, according to what I checked, that particular port is not officially declared safe until sometime later in the early 50s.
And so why they decided to use that port in the first place, I don't understand if it was not safe.
My guess would be rapid contingency. And again, the order went out that ships should be at port, and whatever the nearest port was, you're going to pull in for a few hours.
And so I don't know and if you go into what some of the witnesses, survivors, Korean survivors were saying at the time, I don't know what a dodgy Japanese person would look like, to be honest with you, inside the ship. But you can imagine that there are going to be some angry people, right? People who had relied heavily on the free labor.
And particularly because you're right at the moment of freedom going home, it makes it even more tragic that you perish right at that moment.
Yeah, exactly. And so and we've talked about, even till now, there are very, very, very right-wing conservative Japanese people who continue to raise issues with Korea issues. And so this is also plausible too. But it does seem like, because of the long-standing historic issues between Korea and Japan, that many Koreans do believe, that it was some Japanese person that decided that they were going to be planting an explosive and end this into a tragedy.
There are all kinds of stories out there that obviously do not favor the Japanese account.
Is there any sort of point of dispute between then Korea and Japan in regards to this particular issue? Like, what did
you mean, legally, or like in what terms?
Both legally, and also, did Korea raise the issue against Japan for the tragedy?
Really quickly, and again, 46, the U.S. does a brief investigation and says there's not enough out there, so we're not going to do too much with it. But up until the 65 normalization, this may address your question, there were still people seeking small-term compensation, and they were able to get it. With 65 and that massive deal done with the Japanese, apparently from that point, the legal compensation to individuals for this particular case was essentially ended, with the Japanese perspective being essentially, we've dealt with the larger...
Just like...
So where this is still then an issue is whether people want... the three things. Legal compensation, can we reopen the question? 2, some sort of apology or recognition, which is not particularly shocking. And then 3, most importantly, apparently there are still remains, and there are people who have still been calling for, could you do maybe dredging or whatever, and perhaps find, see if you can find any of the remains still.
My goodness.
Well, presumably they're still at the bottom, yeah.
But, I mean, it's so hard to do, like, a
I
DNA
know, but I'm
test
just saying,
and
but
stuff like that, right?
families apparently are still calling for this.
I mean, it's desperation times,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
As a family member, you kind of understand, right? You want any sort of closure, you want them to return home, especially because they were supposed to finally come home because of liberation.
Yeah, they were basically a couple days ride away.
Yeah. Number one, the normalization of relations between Korea and Japan, 1965 agreement. It did both great things, but also there was a lot of controversy surrounding that.
And as you know, with other things we've talked about, like forced labor, it has closed down. I mean, at least up until now, it closed down those cases exactly under the rubric of we've dealt with everything.
Yeah, and the loans and the money that was given by the Japanese government to Korea was not directed towards the victims. That's the big controversy,
No, it was
right?
directed towards large capitalist holdings.
Yeah,
and that has made South Korea a very different place.
Obviously, no one is going to deny that Korea benefited largely from the loans that were given and the money that was given and stuff. But then the controversy lies on the fact that it's the victims themselves that were not compensated, which is why still till this day. And there was no apology because Japan is not going to admit that it was them that they did
More importantly,
this.
too, and I hadn't even thought about this, but I have to look at the dates, but legally, probably Japan does not have a government at this point in time so it's GHQ. They don't have a new government until 52.
Oh, that's difficult. Then.
And if Migunjong, in theory, is the governing authority on the
And again, another reason why they would hide it, probably if something was going wrong.
My point being that in both cases, the Americans are actually, quote unquote, running things. So yeah, exactly. It's not really Japan and Korea in absolute terms.
So this is why, again, I'm not being a conspiracy theorist.
No, it's a military occupation.
Yeah. So that's why I'm saying that it would be easier that both sides, both kind of, perspectives are plausible, because clearly Americans could have done this And because of the known fact that there were mines and stuff, but what baffles me though is the fact that they used that port and they used that area despite the fact.
I said I haven't looked that deep into it, like why, but my guess again would be probably contingency, proximity, things like that. I don't think they, in other words, they consciously made a choice of, well, we know this is dangerous, but we're going to go venture right in there. I think it was more like this is the nearest port, and let's take our chances.
You teach history at Seoul National University.
Yep.
How often is this part of history mentioned in your classes?
This particular ship, not that often, but this larger process of repatriation and everything before 1948, frequently, because I'm fascinated by the wide open nature of the period in which North and South were not yet on the map as formal entities. There's all this fluidity and weirdness going around. And no, more importantly, if you're Korean, because I ask students this question all the time, the students will think, wow, of course I'd return home. Of course I'm a good Korean. And then you tell them, yeah, but look at what people did historically, and that's not the case.
Yeah.
That is, lots of people did, but lots of people stayed in Japan. Lots of people went other places. Your actors don't always behave the way you'd like them to.
No.
They make their own choices.
And again, with this, there is a reason. Again, studying in the United States, I've never heard of this. I know that it's not mentioned too often in Korean classes.
No, this ship itself was relatively new to me. That's why it's really fascinating.
Yeah, and I think largely because of the fact that there is no clear-cut evidence or facts to show what exactly happened, right? So now, unfortunately, it just becomes just a tragic part of the larger history, which, like you said, is the repatriation.
Right. But if I can throw in something, I think an interesting way is that in terms of how this is remembered, as of course, this is one of the few things from this period that both the North and South and Korea tend to agree on, because they both claim it in particular kinds of ways. And from looking online and other sources, apparently there's a memorial at the source city from which the ship originated. There's a memorial, I believe, in Maizuru where it went down, and there have been films about it. One Japanese, one North Korean. So this is not the South Koreans.
One Japanese, one North. Was it? Hold on. The victims?
No, films about.
Oh, films. I thought you said they were saying that there was only one.
No.
Okay.
But my point is that this is remembered by various parties in various ways. It's much more complicated.
There's a lot of things that. Kind of striking my curiosity.
No Moon-hyun, as recently as 2004, and the Reconciliation Committee, this is one of the things they looked at.
Because so I looked up the memorial for the Ukishima Maru, and Wiki says that there's both in Korea and Japan.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. Where it originated and where it went down.
Busan.
I didn't know there was one in Busan. Okay.
There's one in Busan. There's a memorial to the victims. This was made in 2005 at the Senior Park.
This is exactly part of reconciliation.
It's called the Monument to the Sunnan on an island near. I want to know what it says, though.
Yeah, I'm sure the language is different across the countries.
Because the controversy right now here with the Sato mine is that they refuse to use the word forced in the laborers.
But I'm not defending them, but I understand why they're refusing to acknowledge, because they don't want a legal claim.
No, that's just
hundreds of millions
thing.
of dollars.
Yeah, I mean they've been doing this for. I mean they did this with the Hashima Islands with
Precisely,
the Battleship Island.
This is nothing surprising, exactly.
And so now all of a sudden I'm going, okay, so diplomatically here, it's great.
Yeah.
It was honorable that they were able to set up a memorial for the victims in Japan. However, what does the memorial say is what it is.
It probably means something very different from what Koreans would like it to mean, sure.
And that's the other tragedy of this. Were there any other sort of theories as to what happened? Were those, like, when you were doing some research into this, was that the two major theories that were coming up?
This is where, and as you indicated earlier, obviously with the occupation and time, people speculate. So again, some of the Korean accounts, and I want to be careful here because they are just accounts, but some of the more extreme accounts say things like they think that a certain number of Japanese got off, there were fewer Japanese victims on board, people on board than Koreans, so that obviously people who thought that it was either planned or at least allowed to happen. That being an extreme kind of, almost a conspiracy theory.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the internet postings right now, the mystery route of the Ukishima.
Okay.
They're saying Ukishima departed in Minamoto Port in the Aomori prefecture in northern Japan, headed for Busan.
Right.
And the ship is the fastest route from northern Japan to Busan is across the East Sea. Strangely enough, the Ukishima sailed down to the coast, the Japanese archipelago, and suspicions also were raised that the Ukishima suddenly changed their direction to the Maizuru port. So like the change in the direction was
But again,
one of them.
the official explanation here is that the order went out that you have to be in port at this particular point in time.
Yeah, and when it comes to the exact number of passengers, that
I'd say between
Japan said 3,725.
Okay, I've heard as high as 6,000 or more.
And then testimonies from survivors approximately 7,000 to 5,500.
Exactly.
And so even with this, goodness, I mean, okay, so I shouldn't be looking at this because this is a Korean site, and they could be a little bit biased in regards to this. I have to tread very carefully with this.
So do I. I'm laughing. That's why I know.
Yeah. I just realized I'm reading all this, and I'm going, oh my goodness, wait a second. This is, it's based on a Korean site, so I might be biased there. Always, I like to be cautious when there is no clear-cut facts and evidence.
You have to know. You do what historians do. This is a good object lesson. You read multiple sources in multiple languages, recognize that they don't reconcile, and work with the interesting point that they don't reconcile.
Yeah. All right, Professor De Moya, again, another history lesson that we're able to learn today that is surrounded with mystery. But hopefully this will lead to more of our listeners maybe doing some digging in to find out more about this. Thank you as always, and have a safe rest of the week. We'll see you again next Thursday.
Thanks very much.
You can listen to Korea Now with me, SJ Lee, by downloading the Arirang Radio application or tune in online by visiting www.arirangradio.com. So make sure you tune in Mondays through Fridays, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Korea time.